12,000 years ago, before humanity had even figured out how to plant a field of wheat, a group of hunter-gatherers in modern-day Turkey organized this massive workforce.
Right.
And they didn't gather to build an irrigation system or, a fortified bunker to protect themselves from predators. Instead, they carved these towering T-shaped limestone pillars, and some of them weighed up to 20 tons, which is just wild.
It is. It's completely staggering.
Right, and they dragged them by hand, arranged them in these massive circular enclosures, and carved them with these really intricate, kind of terrifying images of scorpions and lions and vultures. Basically, they built a temple.
Yeah, Göbekli Tepe. And it completely upends everything we thought we knew about the timeline of human civilization.
It really does. I mean, for the longest time, the standard narrative I learned in school was that humans figured out agriculture first.
Right, the agricultural revolution.
Exactly. We domesticated crops, we settled down into villages, we finally had a surplus of food, and because we weren't, constantly starving to death, we had the free time to invent religion and build monuments.
But Göbekli Tepe shatters that timeline entirely.
Right. It suggests that the desire to gather for ritual, to connect with the unseen, that came first.
Yeah, it implies the religious impulse might have actually driven the invention of agriculture. Because, think about it. You have hundreds of people hauling 20-ton stones around. You have to figure out how to feed them.
Yeah, they can't just pause and go forage for berries for 3 days.
Exactly. So the need to sustain the builders of that temple may have been the actual catalyst for farming.
Which is just a massive paradigm shift. And it brings us to the ultimate question for you listening today. Whether you consider yourself deeply religious or strictly atheist or, somewhere completely in between, this is a puzzle we all have to grapple with.
Absolutely.
Why is our species so fundamentally obsessed with the unseen? Because when you look back at human history, variation is usually the rule.
Right, we adapt to our environments.
Yeah. We adapted entirely different diets, completely different architectural styles, different political systems depending on geography. But you point literally anywhere on a timeline of humanity, and you find a belief in the supernatural. Gods, spirits, ghosts, an afterlife, the variation just vanishes. It is shockingly uniform.
It really is a universal human constant. And, the goal for our deep dive today isn't to debate theology.
Right, we're not doing that.
No, we aren't here to argue about whether one specific religion holds objective truth over another. Our mission is to decode the actual mechanical gears of belief.
The nuts and bolts.
Exactly. Because when we examine the cognitive science, the neuroscience, the sociology behind these beliefs, we uncover undeniable truths about how the human brain processes reality.
Yeah, we want to grasp the why and the how beneath the surface of the what. And if we look at the sheer scale of this universality, it's not just ancient monuments.
No, not at all.
It's burial practices from tens of thousands of years ago where early hominids were placing tools and food in graves. And like we said, you don't bury a spear with a body unless you think that person is going to need to hunt wherever they're going next.
Right.
We see it in cave paintings depicting complex shamanic rituals. We even see it in children who haven't even been taught religious concepts yet, just spontaneously generating ideas about invisible forces.
We see it in completely isolated communities, too. Groups that have had zero contact with major global religions. And honestly, we see it in modern individuals who explicitly reject religion but still find themselves, knocking on wood or feeling a weird sense of presence in an empty room.
Yes. The tendency is incredibly robust. So if it is everywhere, across all time, it can't just be a story someone made up around a campfire that successfully got passed down, right?
Right. A mere cultural meme wouldn't have a 100% saturation rate across the globe for millennia. It just doesn't work that way.
So how did the academic world react when they finally realized this?
Well, it caused a massive paradigm shift around the late 1990s and early 2000s. Researchers began to establish this entirely new field, the cognitive science of religion.
Okay, the cognitive science of religion, what's the core idea there?
The core proposition is that religious belief is not primarily a cultural invention. Instead, it's what they call an emergent property of specific cognitive systems that evolve for entirely different, purely survival-based purposes.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm visualizing this emergent property idea correctly. It makes me think of, like an internal combustion engine in a car.
Okay, let's hear it.
The engineers designed that engine to do one specific thing, right? turned small explosions into motion to propel the car forward. They did not design the engine to act as a space heater.
Right, that wasn't the goal.
But because you have metal parts creating friction and these miniature explosions happening inside the cylinders, the engine generates a massive amount of heat. The heat is just an inevitable byproduct of the machinery doing its actual job. Is that kind of how we should view the human brain and its belief in the supernatural?
That analogy perfectly captures the byproduct theory. The human brain evolved certain cognitive engines to solve immediate life or death problems in our ancestral environment.
Like what kind of problems?
Well, we needed engines for social cognition, for understanding complex cause and effect relationships, for detecting patterns in a chaotic wilderness. Those mental engines are running constantly just to keep us alive and functioning in a group.
And they generate psychological heat.
Exactly. As they run, they inevitably produce intuitions about unseen agents, hidden forces, and moral watchers.
That's fascinating. And it's important to clarify that understanding the mechanics of a car engine doesn't mean the heat isn't real. It just explains where it comes from.
Exactly.
So understanding the cognitive mechanics of belief doesn't necessarily explain away a spiritual experience. It just explains why that belief takes the specific universal shape that it does.
It explains the architecture of our intuitions. We are wired to be highly receptive to these concepts. The brain is basically fertile soil for the supernatural.
Which means we need to look at the specific cognitive engines that are generating this heat. What are the actual gears grinding together in our heads?
Well, let's start with survival. We have to go back to the ancestral environment because the way human beings detect danger seems to be the very first building block of belief.
Okay, let's go there. What's the mechanism?
To understand this, we look at the foundational work of cognitive scientists who study threat detection. And they focus heavily on a concept called the Hyperactive Agency Detection Device, or HADD for short.
HADD, Hyperactive Agency Detection Device. It sounds like something you'd buy at a hardware store to find a leak in your pipes, to be honest.
It does sound very mechanical, but it is essentially an incredibly sensitive alarm system built right into your neuroanatomy. It heavily involves the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
The core idea here is that humans have an evolved hair-trigger tendency to attribute agency to ambiguous events.
Let's define agency in this context, because we aren't talking about a real estate agency, obviously.
No, definitely not. In cognitive science, an agent is an entity that acts with intention. It has goals, it has desires, and the ability to make choices.
Okay, so a rock falling down a hill isn't an agent.
Right, that's just an object acting under the law of gravity. But a person throwing that rock is an agent. A wolf hunting a deer is an agent. HADD is the mechanism that constantly scans our environment and asks, was that caused by the wind, or was that caused by an agent with a goal?
And the hyperactive part implies that this alarm system is incredibly prone to going off when it shouldn't.
It is deeply, deeply biased toward false alarms. And to understand the evolutionary math behind why that is, we have to put ourselves in the shoes of a hunter-gatherer.
Okay, I'm ready.
Imagine you are walking through the tall grass of a savanna at dusk.
Yeah.
The visibility is low. Suddenly, you hear a sharp rustling in the bushes just a few feet to your right. You have a fraction of a second to make a decision about what caused that sound.
Man, I can feel my heart rate spiking just picturing it.
Right. In that environment, you are surrounded by potential predators. Big cats, venomous snakes, and potentially hostile humans from other groups.
Yeah, it's a terrifying place to be.
So evolution has programmed your brain to do a rapid subconscious cost-benefit analysis. And it turns out there is a massive asymmetry in the cost of making a mistake. You have two ways to be wrong, a false positive or a false negative.
Okay, let's walk through the false positive first.
So a false positive means your alarm goes off, but there was no actual threat. You hear the rustle in the bushes. Your HADD screams, "That's a hungry leopard."
And I panic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Your brain floods your bloodstream with adrenaline, you drop whatever you're holding, and you sprint in the opposite direction. You run a quarter mile, you climb a tree, and you wait.
Okay.
But it turns out it was just a strange gust of wind. There was no leopard.
What did that mistake cost me?
Well, it cost you a momentary spike in cortisol, you burned a few calories running away, and maybe you look a little foolish to your tribe. It's an inconvenience.
Right. It's embarrassing, but I'm alive. And now consider the false negative.
The false negative means my alarm doesn't go off when it should. You hear the exact same rustling in the bushes. This time, you assume it's just the wind. You suppress the startle response.
I just chill out?
Right. You relax, you keep walking, you don't even turn your head. But it was a leopard.
Oh, no.
The cost of that mistake is your life. you are eaten. And more importantly, from an evolutionary perspective, your DNA is permanently removed from the gene pool. You do not pass on your overly relaxed genes to the next generation.
Right, because Mother Nature is a brutal accountant. When she looks at that math, she realizes she simply cannot afford false negatives. The cost is way too high. So she installs this hyperactive, paranoid alarm system in all of her surviving apes.
We are the descendants of the hominids who are paranoid, the ones who assumed every shadow was a monster and every snap twig was a predator. Those are the ones who survived to have children.
That makes total sense.
Natural selection produced a cognitive system heavily biased toward over-attributing intentional agency to the world. It is infinitely safer to detect 100 agents that aren't there than to miss the one agent that is about to kill you.
I can see this playing out in my own life on a daily basis, honestly. Like, my house is old and it settles at night.
Yeah,
When I'm alone in the dark and I hear the floorboards creak upstairs, my brain's first thought is never, the thermal expansion of the wood is shifting the joists. My brain instantly asks who is walking around in my hallway.
Exactly. That is your HADD firing. And it's not just auditory either. Think about how we process visual information.
Pareidolia, right.
Yes. Pareidolia is the psychological phenomenon where we see faces in inanimate objects. We see a face in the pattern of tree bark or in the front grille of a car or the man in the moon.
It's like we can't unsee it once we notice it.
Right. Our visual cortex is so desperate to detect other agents that it forces the pattern of a face onto random noise.
We do it with technology, too. Like, if I'm working on a critical project and my computer suddenly crashes and deletes my file, I don't just sit back and rationally contemplate the degradation of silicon memory, right?
No, you get mad at
I
it.
get visibly angry at the computer. I yell at the screen as if it intentionally chose this specific moment to ruin my day out of pure spite.
You are attributing malice and intention to a block of metal and plastic. Or consider a Roomba vacuum cleaner. People name them, they talk to them, they feel bad if the Roomba gets stuck in a corner.
We do. We feel actual empathy for a vacuum.
We constantly project agency onto a world that is mostly composed of blind physics and random chance. If a massive storm destroys a village, the survivors struggle to accept it as just a random intersection of atmospheric pressure and temperature. The human brain naturally asks, who sent this storm and why are they angry with us?
This makes total evolutionary sense. I buy the fact that my brain is a hyperactive agency detector, but I feel like I need to pause here and look at the gap between a biological survival instinct and a global religion.
It's a big gap.
Because it's one thing to say my brain thinks a ghost knocked over my water glass instead of a breeze. It's an entirely different thing to say this instinct created Zeus sitting on Mount Olympus, or the complex theological frameworks of Hinduism, or the moral doctrines of Christianity. Getting from a wrestling bush to the Sistine Chapel feels like a massive, unexplained leap.
That is a crucial distinction, and the researchers who formulated this theory are very, very careful to clarify it. HADD does not directly produce religion. Hearing a floorboard creak does not spontaneously write a holy text in your mind.
So what role does it play then?
It provides the cognitive raw material. It creates the fertile perceptual ground from which religious concepts can grow. Think about the supernatural entities that populate the myths, folklore, and religions of every culture on Earth. Ghosts, ancestors, forest spirits, demons, angels, polytheistic gods, monotheistic deities, all of them.
Okay.
Strip away their cultural specifics, and what is the common denominator of all these entities?
Well, they all have a mind. They make decisions.
Exactly. They possess intentionality. They have desires. They have memories. They can be offended. They can be bargained with. They are fundamentally agents.
Wow.
HADD is the biological engine constantly churning out the baseline intuition that invisible intentional agents are operating in the background of our reality. The culture you are born into takes that raw biological intuition and gives it a specific name, a rich backstory, and a moral framework.
Oh, I see.
But the culture is only successful in doing that because your brain is already primed to accept the premise of invisible agents.
So we are biologically predisposed to suspect we are not alone in the room. But there is a massive conceptual hurdle here for me.
What's that?
All the agents we interact with in the real world, other humans, dogs, bears, birds, they're physical. They take up space, they have mass, they're made of meat and bone. How does the human brain so easily accept the concept of an agent that doesn't have a body? A disembodied mind seems like it should completely break our understanding of reality.
It would if our brains were strictly materialist in their default processing. But they aren't. And this leads us to the next vital piece of cognitive machinery, which is heavily researched by developmental psychologists. It is the concept of intuitive dualism.
Dualism. Okay, the philosophical idea that the mind and the body are two separate things. Usually we associate that with René Descartes, right? The 17th century philosopher who argued that the physical body is a machine, but the mind is this immaterial spiritual substance that interacts with it. Are you saying we don't just learn that in a philosophy class?
Developmental psychology suggests we are born Cartesians. We don't need to read philosophy to become dualists. It is our natural default cognitive setting.
Really?
Yes, from an incredibly young age, long before they can articulate complex thoughts, humans intuitively process the mental world and the physical world as entirely separate domains governed by completely different rules.
How do you even prove that, though? You can't sit a toddler down and ask them to explain their views on the mind-body problem.
No, you definitely can't. You have to design very clever experiments that reveal their underlying assumptions. Researchers use storytelling, interactive puppet shows, and carefully structured questioning to see how young children reason about biology versus psychology.
Okay, give me an example.
Some of the most revealing research happens when children are confronted with the concept of death.
That sounds intense. How do they handle that in a lab setting with kids?
They use hypothetical scenarios, often with animal characters in a story. For example, they will tell a child a story about a baby mouse. They describe the mouse's life, what it likes to eat, how it feels about its mother, its favorite hiding spot, really building up the character.
Setting the stage.
And then the story takes a turn. An alligator comes along and eats the mouse. The mouse is dead.
Wow, a bit grim for a puppet show, but okay.
It has to be definitive. The researchers then ask the child a series of questions to see what the child believes has survived this event. First, they ask biological questions. Does the mouse still need to eat cheese? Does the mouse's heart still beat? Will the mouse ever get a tummy ache again?
I'm assuming even young kids understand the biology stops.
They do. Children grasp the concept of biological situation very early on. They will confidently tell the researcher, no, the mouse doesn't need to eat, its body is broken. They understand the physical machine has shut down permanently.
Okay.
But then the researchers switch to psychological questions. Questions about mental states.
Like what? What do they ask?
They'll ask, does the mouse still miss its mother? Does the mouse still want to go home? Does the mouse still know where the cheese is hidden?
And the kids say yes.
A significant percentage of them do. They hesitate, and many conclude that yes, the mouse still misses its mom. The child's intuitive tendency is to see the physical body breaking down, but they view the mental life, the beliefs, the desires, the emotions, as somehow persisting.
But wait, the classic nature versus nurture debate applies here, doesn't it?
Of course.
Are these kids doing this because their brain naturally works this way? Or are they doing it because their parents told them that Fluffy went to doggy heaven when the family pet died last year? It's almost impossible to untangle what a kid brings to the table versus what culture has already poured into their head.
That is exactly what researchers had to control for. They conducted these studies across different cultures, in secular households, in highly religious households.
And what did they find?
What they found is that this dualistic reasoning, this assumption that the mind survives the body, appears in children before they have been formally exposed to religious doctrines about souls or the afterlife.
Before.
Yes. In fact, younger children are often more likely to attribute persisting mental states to the dead mouse than older children who have had more time to be shaped by a secular scientific education.
So it's not a learned cultural script, it's a pre-theoretical intuition. But why? Why does the brain do that?
Because of a profound limitation in how the human brain simulates reality. Think about it. If you want to imagine what it's like to be blind, you can close your eyes. You are simulating the absence of visual input.
Right.
If you want to imagine being deaf, you can imagine silence. But try to simulate what it feels like to not exist. Try to imagine the complete absence of thought.
You can't. Because the very act of trying to imagine nothingness requires you to use your conscious mind to do the imagining.
Precisely. The brain lacks a sensory mechanism to simulate its own non-existence. Consciousness is the only tool we have to perceive anything, so we cannot consciously perceive the end of consciousness. Because it is so cognitively taxing, arguably impossible to imagine the mind simply turning off like a light switch, the brain defaults to assuming the mental states continue. It is just the path of least cognitive resistance.
This is a massive revelation. It means culture doesn't invent the concept of the soul from scratch. Religion doesn't have to convince a skeptical human mind that a spirit can exist without a physical form. The brain already suspects that it can because the brain can't imagine its own mind shutting down.
Intuitive dualism carves out the conceptual space for souls, spirits, and gods. What culture does is step into that pre-existing space and furnish it.
Right, it decorates the room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Culture gives the afterlife specific geography, a fiery underworld, a celestial city, a cycle of reincarnation. It gives the disembodied spirits specific rules. But structurally, every one of those cultural concepts is exploiting the exact same cognitive glitch.
Okay, I am really starting to see the blueprint here. We have HADD, which gives us this paranoid intuition that invisible agents are out there causing things to happen.
Yep.
Then we have intuitive dualism, which gives us the cognitive permission to believe that these agents don't actually need physical bodies to exist. We are literally building the architecture of a ghost right inside our own neurobiology.
We have the raw materials for the supernatural. But there is a filtering mechanism we have to discuss next.
Right. Because humanity has dreamed up millions of bizarre ideas over the millennia. I could invent a completely nonsensical supernatural concept right now.
Let's hear it.
I could say there is an invisible, floating teacup orbiting the planet that dictates our dreams, and it only speaks in the scent of burnt toast. But I highly doubt that concept is going to inspire a global religion with temples and millions of followers. What makes certain supernatural ideas stick around for thousands of years, while others are immediately forgotten?
This is where we look at why some ideas are culturally sticky and others fade away. The cognitive scientist Pascal Boyer provided a brilliant framework for this, which he calls the minimal counterintuitiveness effect.
The minimal counterintuitiveness effect. It sounds like a formula for the perfect ghost story.
It is exactly that. It defines the Goldilocks zone of the supernatural. But to understand what makes something counterintuitive, we first have to understand what makes something intuitive. Boyer points out that our brains come preloaded with what he calls intuitive ontologies.
Ontologies. Categories of being.
Think of them as the fundamental file folders in your brain. When you encounter anything in the world, your brain instantly drops it into one of these folders, and every folder has a strict set of rules. For example, we have an intuitive ontology for physical objects.
Like a rock or a table.
Yes. And the automatic rules for that folder are: objects occupy physical space, they cannot pass through solid matter, and if you drop them, they fall down.
Makes sense.
We also have an ontology for living things, plants and animals. The rules are they need sustenance, they grow, they reproduce, and eventually they die. We have an ontology for artifacts, things made by humans, like a cup or a hammer. The rule is that their function was determined by a creator. And finally, we have an ontology for agents.
Things with minds.
Right. The rules for agents are that they have beliefs, desires, and goals that drive their behavior. Now, these rules are so deeply baked into our cognition that we never even consciously think about them. If I show you a rock, I don't have to explain that the rock doesn't know what day it is. You just know that rocks don't have minds.
Okay, so these are the default settings of reality. How does the supernatural hijack this?
By hitting a very specific cognitive sweet spot. Boyer argues that for a religious or supernatural concept to be memorable enough to be passed down through generations, it must possess most of the properties you expect of its category, but it must violate just one or two of those expectations in a highly memorable way.
A minimal violation.
Let's play with an example. Imagine I tell you a story about a tree in the middle of a dense forest. This tree can listen to your thoughts, and if you ask it a question in your mind, it will whisper the answer in the rustling of its leaves.
Okay, a magical whispering tree.
Which category does that fall into?
Well, it's a plant, a living thing, but it also has a mind, which makes it an agent.
Exactly. It violates the intuitive ontology of a plant. Plants don't have telepathy. But notice how minimal the violation is. It only breaks one rule. Aside from reading your mind, it still behaves exactly like a tree. It has bark, it has roots, it needs sunlight and water to survive. It can be chopped down with an axe.
It's like cooking.
Yeah.
If you are baking caramel cookies and you add a tiny, delicate pinch of sea salt to the top of the caramel, it elevates the entire flavor profile. The contrast between the sweet and the salty makes the cookie unforgettable.
That's a great way to put it.
But if you get heavy-handed and dump an entire cup of salt into the batter, the cookie's disgusting. You have ruined it. The whispering tree is that perfect pinch of the impossible.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The minimal violation is the pinch of salt. Now, let's look at what happens when you dump the whole cup in. Imagine I try to invent a new god for us to worship. This god is a square circle. It exists entirely outside of time, but it only gets angry on Tuesdays. It is completely invisible, but it casts a shadow made of the sound of a bell. It is an animal, but it is also an abstract mathematical theorem.
My brain physically hurts trying to picture that. It's just word salad.
It is maximally counterintuitive.
Yeah.
It violates almost every ontological rule simultaneously. Because it defies so many expectations, it is incredibly cognitively taxing just to hold the concept in your working memory. And if you try to explain that God to someone else through oral storytelling, the message would degrade instantly. They wouldn't remember the details because the details don't connect to any underlying logic.
Whereas with the whispering tree, because it only breaks one rule, I can still use my default logic to interact with it.
Right, cognitive scientists call that productive inference. Because you still know the default rules for a tree, you intuitively know how to worship it. If there's a drought, you know the tree might suffer. So your religious ritual might involve bringing it water. If you want to talk to it, you have to physically walk to the forest because trees don't move. The minimal violation makes it fascinating, but the preserved intuitive rules make it usable.
This explains so much about global mythology. Think about a ghost. A ghost is just an agent, a person with memories and intentions, but it violates one physical rule. It doesn't have a solid body. It can walk through a wall.
Exactly.
But it still has a personality. It still gets angry if you disrespect its grave. It's the perfect minimal violation.
Cross-cultural surveys of religious concepts consistently support this. The supernatural entities that survive the filter of history gods who know what you're thinking, ancestors who watch over you, statues that weep, they're all characteristically minimally counterintuitive. They fit like a key into the lock of our cognitive architecture.
Man, let's take a breath and look at the foundation we've built here. We've explained the how of the individual mind. HADD gives us the paranoia of invisible agents. Intuitive dualism gives those agents a disembodied form. And the minimal counterintuitiveness effect ensures those ideas are just weird enough to be unforgettable. We have basically built the perfect mental virus.
We have the cognitive blueprint. But belief didn't stay confined to the minds of isolated individuals. It shaped human civilization on a macro scale.
Right. We didn't stay in small bands of hunter-gatherers telling stories about ghosts around a fire. We expanded, we built agricultural settlements, then sprawling city-states, and eventually empires with millions of citizens. How did these cognitively sticky beliefs scale up to become the foundational architecture of civilization?
This brings us to a body of research that examines religion not just as an accidental cognitive byproduct, but as a cultural tool that served a profound social function. We have to look at the massive societal problem of cooperation.
Cooperation seems pretty simple when everyone knows everyone else. Like
Right.
in a nomadic tribe of 50 people, everyone is probably related.
Sure.
If I decide to be selfish, if I steal a portion of your meat after a hunt, or I refuse to help defend the camp, everyone knows exactly what I did.
The social consequences in a small-scale society are immediate and severe. Human monitoring is highly effective when the group is small. Your reputation is literally your life.
Right.
If you get caught cheating the group, you might be ostracized, exiled, or even killed.
Yep.
In that environment, the threat of your neighbors finding out is more than enough to keep you cooperative.
But the math changes completely when society scales up. Once humanity settles down and builds a city with thousands of inhabitants, anonymity skyrockets.
Exactly. You enter the era of interacting with strangers.
Mm.
You are buying grain in a marketplace from someone you have never met and will likely never see again.
Yeah.
The temptation to cheat, to shortchange a transaction, or to steal when no one is looking becomes immense.
Because who's going to know it?
All right. This is known in sociology as the free rider problem. How do you get individuals to sacrifice their own selfish interests for the good of a massive anonymous group? Without a mechanism to enforce cooperation among strangers, large societies tend to fracture under the weight of selfishness and collapse.
You can't hire enough police officers to watch everyone all the time.
So you outsource the policing to the supernatural. Enter the big gods hypothesis, most prominently articulated by the psychologist R. Lorenzian.
Big gods, meaning gods that are all-knowing and deeply concerned with human morality.
Lorenzian argued that as societies grew larger, the supernatural concepts that survived were the ones that promoted social cohesion. A local forest spirit who just wants you to leave an offering of berries doesn't care if you cheat a merchant in the city.
Right, the forest spirit doesn't care about the economy.
Exactly. But an all-seeing, morally punitive big god who demands honesty and threatens eternal punishment for theft, that changes behavior.
It acts as the ultimate CCTV camera, a supernatural surveillance state.
Precisely. It provides credible monitoring of behavior in contexts where human monitoring is impossible. If a person truly deeply believes that an omniscient God is watching them, even when they are alone in a dark alley with someone else's wallet, They will act cooperatively. They act as if they are being watched because to them, they are.
And there is actual empirical data to back this up, right? It's not just a historical theory.
There's a wealth of research using behavioral economics. One of the classic setups is called the dictator game. It is a very simple laboratory experiment used to measure altruism.
How does it work?
You bring a participant into a lab. You hand them an envelope with, say, 10 $1 bills. You tell them you can keep as much of this money as you want, or you can leave some of it in this other envelope, and we will give it to a completely anonymous stranger who gets nothing otherwise. No one will ever know how much you kept or how much you gave.
Total anonymity. The perfect condition for the free rider problem to show up. I'm guessing most people just pocket the $10.
A lot of them do, or they give a token amount, like $1. But the researchers added a twist. Before playing the game, they subtly primed the participants.
Prime them how?
In one group, they had participants do a word scramble task that included words like spirit, divine, God, and sacred. They didn't preach to them, they just activated the religious nodes in their semantic network.
And what happened?
The participants who were primed with religious concepts gave significantly more money to the anonymous stranger compared to the control group.
Wow. Just from unscrambling words.
Yes, just the subconscious reminder of a supernatural watcher was enough to increase altruistic behavior in an anonymous setting. Furthermore, when historians map the data, the rise of world religions featuring these moralizing, punitive big gods correlates incredibly tightly with historical leaps in the scale and complexity of human societies.
It is a phenomenal narrative. Religion as the ultimate social glue that allowed us to build civilization. But wait, hold on. I have to interject here. Because if a moralizing big god is the only way to solve the free rider problem and build a high-trust society, how do you explain Sweden or Denmark or Norway?
The Scandinavian example.
Seriously. If you look at modern Scandinavia, these are some of the most secular, least religious societies on the planet. Church attendance is minimal. Belief in a literal punishing God is incredibly low. And yet they have off-the-charts levels of social trust, cooperation, and civic engagement.
It's true.
You can practically leave a laptop on a table in a coffee shop in Copenhagen, walk away for an hour, and it will still be there.
Yeah.
Doesn't the existence of modern secular democracies completely break Lorenzian's math?
That is the most potent empirical challenge to the big gods theory, and it is a debate that is currently raging in the field. The consensus requires a very careful parsing of the data. The correlation between moralizing gods and societal scale in ancient history is strong, but it may be a correlation, not a strict exclusive causation.
Meaning they evolved together, but one didn't necessarily birth the other.
Correct. As ancient society scaled up, they developed many new technologies simultaneously to handle the complexity. They invented written laws, they created institutional policing, they developed complex bureaucracies, and they evolved moralizing religions.
Oh,
It is difficult to isolate big gods as the sole engine of cooperation.
okay, I see.
What secular societies like Scandinavia prove is that while religion may have been a highly effective historical mechanism to bootstrap large-scale trust, it is not the only mechanism capable of sustaining it today.
You can basically replace the supernatural CCTV camera with secular institutions.
Yes, a robust welfare state, transparent governance, an independent judiciary, and secular rule of law can clearly achieve the exact same pro-social ends without the need for supernatural monitoring.
And we also need to talk about the dark side of this social glue, because when we talk about religion promoting cooperation, we usually frame it as a universal positive: peace, love, charity. But history tells a much bloodier story.
It does. This is the shadow side of group cohesion. The intense within-group cooperation that is fostered by shared religious belief frequently, almost inevitably coexists with intense hostility toward outgroups.
It's like, love thy neighbor, but wage a holy war on the neighboring tribe.
Exactly. It raises a profound evolutionary question. Did religion evolve to promote general human flourishing, or did it evolve to produce intense, tight-knit groups that are highly effective at outcompeting and destroying rival groups?
Wow, that's heavy.
The big gods might make you incredibly altruistic toward the people in your own congregation. But if the people across the river worship a different big god with a competing moral framework, that same social glue mandates aggression against them. Religion is a highly potent mechanism for group cohesion, but absolute group cohesion is exactly what you need to wage organized, uncompromising warfare.
The ultimate double-edged sword. So we've looked at the societal level. We've seen how belief builds empires and fuels wars. But religion isn't just a set of social rules or historical trends. To millions of people, it is not a sociological abstraction. It is a profound, deeply personal, in-the-flesh experience. People don't just believe in the sacred, they feel it.
Yes, we must pivot from the macro-sociology back to the intimate neuroscience of the individual.
Throughout recorded history, across entirely different cultures and religions, individuals have reported mystical experiences, the sudden feeling of the ego dissolving, a sense of absolute unity with the universe, an overwhelming encounter with a presence of ultimate significance. What is physically happening in the wet matter of the brain when someone touches the divine?
The neuroscience of religious experience is one of the most fascinating and fiercely contested frontiers in modern science. And it has a rather colorful history. We have to start with a cautionary tale from the 1980s involving a Canadian neuroscientist named Michael Persinger and his invention, which the media quickly dubbed the God helmet.
The God helmet. It sounds like a prop from a low-budget sci-fi movie. What was he actually doing?
Persinger theorized that religious experiences were the result of microseizures or electrical instability in the temporal lobes of the brain. To test this, he modified a snowmobile helmet and wired it to generate weak, complex magnetic fields.
A snowmobile helmet, really?
Yeah, a modified helmet.
Yeah.
He would bring subjects into a sensory deprivation chamber, put the helmet on them, and apply these magnetic fields directly to their temporal lobes.
Did it work? Did they see God?
He reported staggering results. According to Persinger, the magnetic stimulation reliably induced sensations of an invisible presence in the room, profound feelings of cosmic meaning, and even direct visions of angels or deities. The media went wild. It looked like science had found a literal, physical God button in the human brain.
That would be a monumental discovery, but you called it a cautionary tale. I take it the God button was a mirage.
It was a classic failure of experimental design. When independent laboratories attempted to replicate Persinger's dramatic findings, they instituted a crucial safeguard that Persinger had lacked: double-blind protocols.
Meaning neither the scientist running the test nor the subject wearing the helmet knows if the magnetic field is actually turned on.
Exactly. In a double-blind setup, you put the helmet on the subject, but the computer randomly decides whether to actually deliver the magnetic stimulation or do nothing at all. When other researchers did this, the effect completely vanished. The magnetic fields weren't doing anything.
So why were Persinger's original subjects having these wild visions if the fields did nothing?
The immense power of suggestion. Expectancy effects. Imagine you are brought into a highly official university laboratory. You are placed in a dark, silent, sensory deprivation room.
Okay, I'm spooked already.
Right, and a scientist in a lab coat straps a bizarre wire-covered helmet to your skull and essentially says, "We are about to stimulate your brain to induce a profound spiritual experience. Ready? Go."
The brain is a prediction machine. If you prime it to experience a ghost, it will hallucinate a ghost.
Precisely. It was essentially the placebo effect of mysticism. The God helmet was largely discredited. However, the failure of the helmet did not kill the neuroscience of the sacred. It merely forced the science to become much more rigorous. Today, we are seeing incredibly robust findings emerging from modern neuroimaging, particularly involving functional MRI machines.
Right, they put Tibetan monks and Franciscan nuns into fMRI machines while they meditate or pray. But the most striking data seems to be coming from the resurgence of psychedelic science.
Yes. The research pioneered by teams like Robin Carhart-Harris and his colleagues at Imperial College London has been revolutionary. They're using psilocybin, the active psychoactive compound found in magic mushrooms, to induce altered states while mapping the brain's real-time blood flow.
Now, for anyone skeptical about equating a drug trip with a genuine religious experience, it's worth noting that structurally, psilocybin is remarkably similar to serotonin, a neurotransmitter already floating around in our brains.
That's a vital point.
And the experiences these participants report aren't just seeing pretty colors. They report encounters that they later rank as among the top 5 most deeply meaningful experiences of their entire lives, on par with the birth of a first child.
The phenomenological overlap between a high-dose psilocybin experience and a classical mystical experience reported by a saint or a mystic is nearly indistinguishable.
Really?
Yes, the dissolution of time and space, the overwhelming sense of universal love, the breakdown of the boundary between self and other, it's all there. And because Carhart-Harris is doing this inside an fMRI machine, we can finally see what the brain is doing during ego death.
What's the physical signature of transcendence?
It is the dramatic suppression of a system called the default mode network, or the DMN.
When I hear default mode, I assume that means the brain's resting state, like a computer idling on a screensaver when you walk away from the keyboard.
It's the exact opposite of a screensaver. The DMN is a highly active, highly interconnected network of brain regions that is primarily engaged when you are awake, but not focused on a task in the outside world. It is the neurological seat of your autobiographical self. It is the conductor of the orchestra.
What does the conductor do?
It creates the narrative of you. When your mind wanders, the DMN is what's running. It is the voice in your head that worries about the presentation you have to give tomorrow, ruminates on the argument you had with your spouse yesterday, and constantly monitors your social standing.
The inner monologue.
Right. And crucially, the DMN maintains the rigid cognitive boundary between me and everything else in the universe.
It's the ego.
Yes. And what the fMRI scans show is that during a profound psychedelic experience, and notably, during deep expert-level meditation, blood flow to the default mode network dramatically drops. Activity in the DMN plunges. The conductor leaves the podium.
What happens to the brain when the conductor leaves?
Without the DMN strictly policing the flow of information, completely different regions of the brain that normally never speak to one another suddenly start communicating directly.
Oh, wow.
The rigid boundaries of the self collapse. Phenomenologically, the subject no longer feels where their body ends and the chair begins. The brain literally stops drawing the line between me and the cosmos. The result is the profound, overwhelming sensation of universal unity.
This is where it gets incredibly thorny, and I think this is the absolute philosophical crux of this entire deep dive, because we have mapped the mechanism. We know that suppressing the default mode network triggers the feeling of the sacred. But does knowing the mechanism invalidate the meaning?
That is the ultimate question.
If we can reliably trigger a life-altering spiritual epiphany with a chemical that mimics serotonin, does that mean the mystical experience is nothing more than a biological illusion, a beautiful hallucination caused by a temporary chemical misfiring?
It's a possibility we have to consider.
Or, conversely, is the brain just a complex radio receiver? Is the DMN like a dial tuned to a static frequency of daily survival, and shutting it down simply allows us to finally tune into a deeper, truer frequency of reality that was broadcasting all along?
And that, right there, is the boundary line, where empirical science must stop and philosophy must begin. As analysts of the data, we must sit with the profound difficulty of that question. The fMRI machine shows us the biological correlate of the experience. It shows us the how. But a brain scanner cannot resolve the truth value of the experience itself.
It can't tell you if what you saw when the ego dissolved was real.
It cannot.
Yeah.
It cannot definitively answer whether these altered brain states are genuinely revelatory of a higher spiritual reality, or if they are simply compelling but non-veridical alterations in neurochemistry. Science maps the territory of the synapses. It cannot definitively say who or what is speaking in the quiet moments when the ego shuts down.
It's a remarkably humbling place to end up. We have all this incredible technology to peer inside the living skull, and we are still left staring at the same ultimate mystery our ancestors faced at Göbekli Tepe.
We really are.
But this realization that belief is this deeply hardwired into our psychology, our sociology, and our neurochemistry brings us to a massive collision with modern history.
You were thinking of the failed predictions of the 20th century.
Yes. If religion is a biological constant, why did a century of the world's smartest thinkers confidently guarantee that religion was about to go extinct?
You were referring to the secularization thesis. This was the dominant paradigm in sociology for over 100 years.
Break down the mindset for us. Why were they so sure?
Thinkers like Emil Durkheim, Max Weber, and later intellectuals looking back at the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution plotted a very straightforward graph. They viewed religion primarily as a primitive scientific theory.
Like an early attempt to explain the world.
Exactly. To them, early humans invented gods to explain lightning, disease, and the changing of the seasons. The sociologists assumed that as the scientific method advanced, as we mapped the genome, cured diseases, and understood atmospheric pressure, the need for supernatural explanations would evaporate.
Education and technology were supposed to be the cure for belief.
They predicted that modernization, mass urbanization, and scientific literacy would progressively and inevitably erode religious belief on a global scale. Religion would be relegated to the history books, replaced by secular rationality.
But the data did not play along. The secularization thesis turned out to be one of the most spectacularly incorrect predictions in the history of social science.
It failed dramatically on a global scale. The 20th and 21st centuries have absolutely not brought about the uniform decline of religion. In fact, if you look at the global demographics, we are witnessing massive, unprecedented religious explosions.
The explosive exponential growth of Pentecostal Christianity in the global south is a prime example of this. Places like Latin America, sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Asia are seeing tens of millions of conversions.
Yes.
And we have seen the immense political and cultural mobilization of Islamic religious identity across the Muslim world. We are seeing a massive revival of Hindu nationalism in India.
And even in societies that have experienced every single modernizing condition that Weber and Durkheim claimed would eradicate belief, religious practice demonstrates unexpected, stubborn resilience.
When you tie this all together, it makes perfect sense why the sociologists were wrong. If we go back to our very first points, the hyperactive agency detection device, intuitive dualism, the minimal counterintuitiveness effect, you realize that science didn't cure religion because religion isn't a disease of ignorance.
Right.
It is an emergent property of human cognitive biology. Teaching someone the laws of thermodynamics does absolutely nothing to turn off the alarm system in their amygdala that detects unseen agents.
Precisely. The cognitive science of religion provides a robust biological explanation for why secularization hit a wall. If religious belief is grounded in universal, evolved features of human psychology, then the persistence of those cognitive tendencies guarantees the persistence of religious belief.
It's hardwired.
It doesn't matter if you have a smartphone in your pocket and a degree in astrophysics. You are still running a Pleistocene-era brain that intuitively separates the mind from the body.
So what do sociologists do now? Do they just admit defeat? Is the concept of a secular world just a myth?
It's not a myth, but the theory required a massive nuanced upgrade. This brings us to thinkers like the philosopher Charles Taylor and sociologists like Jose Casanova. Taylor introduced a concept that has become incredibly influential, the idea of the secular age.
How does Taylor define a secular age if it doesn't mean an age without religion?
Taylor argues that secularization didn't mean the disappearance of belief. It meant the radical reorganization of it. In the year 1500, in Western Europe, religious belief was the inescapable default of reality.
Everyone just believed.
The entire social structure, the calendar, the political system, the very concept of time, was entirely saturated with the divine. Unbelief was almost cognitively impossible.
It was a monopoly.
Yes. What modernization did was break the monopoly. Taylor argues that a secular age is one in which religious belief is simply one option among many. We shifted from an institutional default to a highly pluralistic, individualized, free market of worldviews.
That's a great way to put it.
Today, you can choose to be a devout Catholic, a Buddhist, an atheist, or spiritual, but not religious. But crucially, whatever you choose, you do so knowing that your neighbor might choose something completely different, and society will still function.
We live in a supermarket of worldviews. You have to actively place your belief in your cart. It isn't just handed to you at birth anymore.
Exactly. Institutional religious participation going to a specific building every Sunday has declined in many Western nations. But private, deeply felt spiritual belief, the intuitions of the soul, the feeling of unseen agency, heavily persists.
But here is the fascinating twist. Even if someone listening to this considers themselves entirely secular, entirely irreligious, standing in the middle of that modern supermarket and rejecting every supernatural claim, they still cannot escape the legacy of belief.
How so?
Because it is baked into the very air we breathe. It is fossilized in the language we speak every single day.
Yes. We are moving from the macro sociology of the globe down to the micro level of daily vocabulary. And this is a particularly crucial insight for anyone trying to navigate English-speaking societies.
The linguistic ghost of religion, English, particularly American English, is deeply saturated with the vocabulary of faith. But it functions in a very tricky, contextual way that can be incredibly confusing if you aren't native to the culture.
American culture, historically and currently, retains a higher degree of religious permeation than many comparable Western European nations. As a result, the language of faith is woven into everyday, secular speech. But it often functions as a cultural idiom rather than a literal assertion of doctrine.
Distinguishing between literal doctrine and a cultural idiom is a massive part of cultural competence. Let's walk through some examples.
Sure.
If I am in the kitchen and I drop a glass on the floor and it shatters and I yell out, "Jesus," I am not initiating a theological discussion about the Savior of the New Testament. I am using a religious figure as an expletive to express sudden frustration.
The literal meaning is entirely divorced from the usage. Consider phrases like "God willing," "there but for the grace of God go I," "holy cow," or describing a ruined, desolate town as God-forsaken.
Right.
All of these terms carry a heavy religious etymology. They originated in literal theological concepts.
Hmm.
But in modern usage, they carry varying degrees of literal meaning depending entirely on the context, the speaker, and the region.
Bless your heart is arguably the greatest example of this in the American South.
It is a masterclass in contextual idiom.
Depending on exactly where you were standing below the Mason-Dixon line and the specific intonation of the speaker's voice, bless your heart can be a genuine expression of profound religious sympathy. But more often than not, it is a polite, socially acceptable, culturally sanctioned way of calling someone an absolute idiot to their face.
And if you lack the cultural context to decode that idiom, you will completely misunderstand the interaction. This is why mastering terms like secular, sacred, doctrine, agnostic, polytheism, orthodox is so vital. It isn't just to pass a theology exam.
It's to pass a civic exam. If you are reading a newspaper article about American voting demographics or debates over public school curricula or Supreme Court decisions, you need this vocabulary simply to understand the civic conversation. Religion is a load-bearing pillar of the culture's history, and therefore, it is a load-bearing pillar of the language. You cannot master the language without understanding the linguistic ghosts that haunt it.
It is an inescapable dimension of the social and political landscape.
Let's take a massive step back and look at the incredible territory we've covered today. We started 12,000 years ago in the dust of Göbekli Tepe, realizing the desire for the sacred came before the desire for the plow.
We walk through the ancestral savanna, feeling the hair-trigger survival instinct of HADD, a biological paranoia that kept us alive by populating the shadows with invisible agents.
We observed how our natural, childlike intuition of dualism, the brain's inability to imagine its own end, gave those invisible agents a soul. We saw how the minimal counterintuitiveness effect acted as a perfect filter, ensuring only the most memorable, perfectly seasoned supernatural concepts survived across generations.
We watched those beliefs scale up into the big gods, providing the supernatural surveillance necessary to force strangers to cooperate and build sprawling civilizations.
We looked deep into the fMRI machines to see the default mode network shutting down, dissolving the ego, and chemically generating the undeniable feeling of the sacred.
We saw the hubris of the early sociologists who confidently predicted the death of religion, only to be proven wrong, because you cannot out-educate human neurobiology.
And finally, we saw how this unbroken chain from biology to civilization is permanently fossilized in the idioms we speak today. The study of belief is, without a doubt, the study of the human operating system.
It's profound.
It really is. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought. A provocation to mull over that builds on everything we just discussed. A look into the future.
I'm intrigued. Where are you going with this?
If our brains are biologically wired by HADD to instantly detect intentional, invisible minds in the environment, and if we are biologically wired by intuitive dualism to easily accept that minds can exist without physical bodies, how is our ancient Pleistocene cognitive machinery going to react in the next 20 years as we start interacting with highly advanced artificial intelligence?
The new disembodied agents.
Exactly. When a disembodied voice from a machine speaks to us with perfect, empathetic conversational fluency, when it remembers our past, anticipates our emotional needs, and creates art for us, are we biologically destined to start attributing a soul to the algorithm?
Wow.
Our hyperactive agency detectors evolved to find minds in rustling bushes. How are they going to handle a neural network? Are we going to accidentally invent the next pantheon of gods simply because our brains cannot tell the difference between a digital ghost and a divine one?
Given the cognitive architecture we've explored today, the answer is almost certainly yes. We are biologically primed to fall for the illusion.
And on that slightly terrifying, mind-bending note, we want to warmly thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the unseen, keep challenging your own assumptions, and never stop exploring the fascinating, flawless machinery of your own mind. We'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening.